Hello, thanks to everyone for joining us today. My name is Shannon McFarland. I am the Director of Content at Securacy, and today we're hosting our webinar on how to build a free business continuity plan. So we wanted to host this because businesses are facing this ongoing uncertainty around COVID-19, and our company and many others have found how useful having a disaster recovery and business continuity plan can be for our company. And we wanted to make sure that our clients, customers, and businesses everywhere have access to free information and tools to be able to prepare your business and chart your course through these difficult times. So with me today, I have here Russell. So Russell is our customer success manager at Securacy, and he's going to walk us through some steps about what's included in a business continuity plan and some more great information.
Awesome, thank you very much, Shannon. So just to kind of jump right in, everybody, today what we are going to cover or look at on the agenda will be a quick definition of what a BCDR plan is, or a business continuity and disaster recovery plan. Next, we'll take a look at a documented BCDR plan, a little PDF, and see what are the details that are included in it. And then finally, we'll actually walk through the Securacy application, the free tool to create your own BCDR plan, and have some examples. So to begin with,
actually, let's launch that poll. So we're going to do a quick poll before we really dive in here. And so I'm going to launch a poll right now. And the question here that you should be seeing pop up in this quick poll is, does your company have a business continuity plan? And so I'm going to leave this open for just a moment while Russell's talking, so that way he can make sure that he's going to give you the content that you really want to know about updating or creating or helping you to understand why you should have a continuity plan here.
Perfect. So exactly. So let's cover the definition. What is a business continuity plan? So to begin with, it's a document that will outline pretty much the steps for what your organization needs to do to continue functioning during a disaster or a major incident. Included within the plan are going to be a few things. So it's going to include your critical business functions. These are the elements of your business that are essential to maintain during a disaster or an incident. And we will cover some examples a little later on. The next thing it's going to take into account is going to be the health and safety of your employees. So they are a vital function of your business. Without them and them carrying on their role, your business wouldn't be able to function. So that will be included as well within the business continuity plan. And then finally, the dependencies of your operations. So the critical business functions, what do they touch and what do they include? Is there software? Are there people involved with these that are dependent for your operations to kind of continue? Perfect. So I'll just jump here to the next slide. It looks like the poll's still in progress there, Shannon.
Yeah, I'm going to close that poll. So it looks like we have a good mix of people who already have a business continuity plan, as well as a handful of people who don't have one yet and want to learn more to create one, or have one that is in progress.
Awesome. So we have a little bit of a mix. So let's look at some of the objectives for a business continuity plan. So what are the goals for having one? So the first one is going to be to ensure the health and safety of your employees. So during a disaster or an incident, to maintain that your employees' health and safety, allow them to continue doing their job so that your business can still function. You'll want to maintain the critical functions of your business. So if it's selling software, if it's producing something, if it's making sales, you need to have those documented, their dependencies noted, so that you can quickly and easily maintain those critical functions for your business. The next thing you're going to want to have and ensure that the business continuity plan addresses is ensuring that your employees have everything that they need to do their job. So do they have their laptops? Do they have the software, the services that they need to do to continue to sell your software, to continue to support your customers? And then finally, the objective, or the main objective of a business continuity plan, again, is to protect your data, to ensure that you can protect, along with your employees, your critical business functions, the vital data to your company. And here we'll use the CIA triad, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So throughout the activation of your business continuity plan, you want to ensure that you are protecting your data and addressing and looking at the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of that data throughout the incident. So finally, let's look now at what a BCDR plan covers. So these are the individual elements that are in most plans, and they will change kind of depending on your organization, but with our free tool, this is the elements that you'll include here. And so we'll have an introduction. This is essentially an overview of the document. It'll break down and explain what the document is to anybody who is reading it, giving the scope, the objectives of your plan. The next section will be a risk assessment. So this will be a list of all the threats and risks that would make you implement the plan. So anything from a flood, a fire, COVID-19, a pandemic, that sort of thing. So addressing all those risks and kind of doing an assessment on them, what are the chances that they could occur, and then finally kind of addressing each of them individually. The next will be listing out your critical business functions. So these are the essential things that your business must maintain in order to continue functioning. So we will cover a few examples later on. Finally, the plan activation procedures. So these are how the plan will actually be implemented. So this is that step-by-step process. How is this going to take effect? The next will be the alternate business site. So for certain incidents, you may not have to actually leave your office, but it is good to prepare and plan ahead of time if something does occur that would force you to leave the office. A fire, a flood, or switching to remote work, such as we have with the COVID-19 pandemic. It is good to have that planned and documented ahead of time. The next would be the employee communication procedures. So how is this communicated to employees, and what is the contact information for those essential employees as well? The next section is the delegation of authority and responsibility. So this will be who is in charge of what within your organization. And if something was to happen to them, who would take charge? Who is that second or third person who could jump in and fill that role? And then, of course, what needs to take place there for this person to switch over and take responsibility for somebody. And then finally, the last thing will be the plan deactivation procedures. And these are the steps to return to normal operations once the incident or once the disaster has ended. So you'll want to have a documented steps as well. So these can kind of be theoretical, or as well as you're working and re-implementing your BCDR plan to return to normal operations, you can always change these and kind of progress as your plan adapts and you return to normal business operations. All right, so let's actually now take a look at a PDF, an example for a business continuity and disaster recovery plan. So I'm going to switch over here. Perfect. So here we have an example PDF powered by the Security application. So we will touch on in just a moment actually how to build this yourself. But taking a look here at the table of contents, you're going to see those elements that I just referred to in the last slide. So you'll see our breakdown of the introduction. Again, it'll have some subsections in there for the overview, the scope of the plan, conditions. We'll have our risk assessment, a listing of our critical business functions. We have a few examples here that we'll cover, but these will be specific to your organization or your company. So they are the functions that keep you running or keep your business functioning. Finally, the plan activation procedures. So what's going to happen if this plan is activated during business hours or outside of business hours? An alternate site, alternate business site overview, alternate site details and special considerations. So again, this is the area where we'll kind of outline and document if something happens and you have to move to another location or have to change and your employees are now going to be remote workers like we've done here at Security during the COVID-19 pandemic. You'll have that documented here as well. We have our employee communication procedures. So this is going to be a breakdown of how we can reach out to vital and key employees. We have a few examples here, but usually this will actually include most of your employees or the vital ones for kind of continuing your operation. So we usually see your C-suite here, CTOs, CEOs, or those that have kind of a vital role within your organization. You want to have their contact information documented and in one place in the document. So it's easy and accessible when you have to activate this plan. You can jump in here and have all the information at your fingertips. And then the next section here is that delegation of authority and responsibility. So an explanation of what this section is. And then we have a few roles that we've included here, our CEO and our CTO as our vital roles, and then what will happen if they are unavailable, who will take over for them. And next we have our plan deactivation procedures. So this is going to be an overview of the steps for kind of deactivating our plan and returning to normal business operations. So we can kind of run through that PDF, but we have it there in the handout, so you can kind of just take that and take a look at it. What we are going to do, though, to switch over and do it a little more dynamically is to actually use the Security platform to generate a BCDR for us today. So I'm going to switch over here and actually just jump back one step. So here I am logged into a Security account. So this feature is available both for our existing users and all new users. It is a free tool, so if you sign up, you'll have access to it. I can access it by going under Program and Business Continuity. And that'll take me right into the tool itself. So up top, you'll see those sections we alluded to before in the previous slides and in the PDF. And then we'll see each individual section below. So what we're going to do now is actually walk through each individual section, kind of cover a little bit of helper text on it, so give a brief introduction of what that section is, and then read some of the actual placeholder information we have here within the BCDR tool. So once you have it set up and you log in, it will actually look very similar to this. Mine is a little more built out for this example, but you will have helper text in here that you can always read. You can edit this section as well. So to include things that are relevant for your business, you can come in here and update this as well. So let's kind of jump in here and look at what the introduction is for the business continuity and disaster recovery plan. So the introduction, again, as I said, is kind of an overview of that document. It'll introduce somebody to it. The sections or subsections that we have are the overview. So this is essentially meant to justify why that document exists. It's going to provide a description for your employees, anybody reading this document, of what it covers at a high level. So the need for a business continuity and disaster recovery plan is a lot like insurance. Having a plan that will address the most important functions of your business, the factors that ensure the health and safety of your employees, the dependencies and required steps to keeping your company functioning during that disaster. The next section will be the scope of the plan. So the scope is going to be all the different elements that that plan covers. So here we have the text here that kind of outlines the different sections that will be included by default. So the scope of our plan is going to assess the risks on the business. We'll look at our critical business functions and their priority order in the recovery and continuity of our organization. We'll look at the procedures for initiating and deactivating the plan. We'll have our alternate business site and remote work conditions. We have our employee communication procedures, and finally, our delegation of authority and responsibility. The next section we'll have is the objectives of the plan. So what are the objectives of a business continuity plan? So it's a deliberate list of pretty much the reasons or the objectives, of the plan itself. So what is the goal of this plan? The goal of the plan is to maintain the health and safety of your employees. It's to continue your primary business functions, keep you running during this instance so that nothing happens to your company. And as well, it's to maintain and protect the data that your company has to protect your intellectual property and essentially to keep you functioning during the entire incident. Finally, we have the conditions of the plan. This will be the last section in the introduction. So this is the conditions of the plan. What events or occurrences would trigger and cause this plan to be activated. So the following plan is conditional in that the following conditions must be met in order for the plan to be initiated. An event or series of events occurs which causes a disruption to the critical business functions. An event or series of events occurs which causes employees' inability to use workspaces and work facilities. And then finally, a temporary or long-term loss of workforce of over 20% of the current total number of employees. And again, these are kind of specific to your organization or what you would like to cover, so you can edit each of these sections. You can come in here and quickly add a new line or a new item in as well. But right now, we'll leave it as the default text. So the next section we're going to look at will be the risk assessment. And so when the first time you log in here, it will be a blank risk assessment. I have included a few examples that we can kind of touch on, but what I'm going to do is just kind of scroll down a little bit to look at a few definitions of what we're going to cover in the risk assessment. So our risk assessment table up top is broken down into threats, risks, and the impact. The threats are pretty much just a list of the different events or different things that could cause disruption to your normal business functions, or that could cause interruptions to those critical business functions, harm your employees. So here we have a few different ones. We have fire, we have flood. I've included COVID-19 here on the list, so if that renders our primary office unusable. I've included malware and viruses. I have then included some of our primary roles. So our CEO, if they are sick and unable to perform their work for 2 weeks, our CTO and COO. And then I have some technical ones here as well. So if you're hosting a software application or have an AWS instance, a DDoS attack, or say AWS region redundancy. So you'll look at each of these threats, and what we'll do for each one is take a look at the probability. So this is the chance that this threat will occur. So what is the chance with, say, flood or fire? Depending on your specific location, that might be a little different. But if you have, basic fire suppression systems or flood monitoring systems, if you're located where we are in a small area, it's kind of a less chance of these things happening. So we have the probability ranked as low here. But for COVID-19, the probability, well, we're in the midst of that right now, so say that is high. Again, just kind of looking at what is the chance that this could affect your normal business operations. Next would be the criticality. So what is the overall impact that this would have on your organization? So depending if it is a fire, it might be very high. If your building burns down or your office burns down, that is a high criticality. With malware or viruses, it might be more of a medium criticality. What is the impact? Well, if you have kind of necessary controls in place, antivirus, if you have security awareness training, your employees know not to click on links, the criticality of that might be a little lower, as the chance of kind of that probability would be lower as well. And then finally, we'll look at the actual impact of that risk itself. So then we're back in looking at the CIA triad, that confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So what is the impact on the confidentiality of that data? So what is the chance that it could get out there into public hands or somebody who shouldn't have access to that data? What is the impact on the integrity? So could that data be changed or manipulated in any way, and can that be prevented? And then finally, what is the risk to the availability of that data? So in the example of, say, a DDoS attack where you no longer have access to your application, it is under a complete DDoS right now, the availability would be, the risk to that would be high. You wouldn't have that access. So again, these risks will be specific to your organization. We have a few different examples here. And you can kind of include your own and then go through that process of ranking. What is the probability of this happening? What is the criticality? So what impact does this risk have on my organization? And then finally, look at the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data or of your operations. So you can kind of look at it in two lights. So once you've conducted your risk assessment here, I'm just going to take out a couple of these blank rows. You can remove or add in new lines as well here as you build it out. We're going to jump to the next section. And so that next one is going to be a listing of all our critical business functions. Again, we are presented here with the overview and some helper text. So what is the critical business functions? What are the conditions? What are the elements and the sections that would be covered in this plan? So here in our overview, this section provides an overview of our company's critical business functions, including their descriptions, supporting tasks, any supporting documentation, who is the owner of the specific function, any dependencies, and the methods of contacting any vendors or contracts that relate to this service. So we kind of went through a few different examples here with actually our own company, Security, in mind. I kind of took this or borrowed this from our own disaster recovery plan. And so one of our critical business functions is selling our product to new customers. So we need to be able to maintain our sales process throughout COVID-19 and this pandemic. So looking at the supporting tasks. So what are the tasks or dependencies to maintain this function of selling our software? So it's sales, acquiring, following up on leads, qualifying leads, engaging in demos and sales calls, and providing quotes to prospects. And then finally, most importantly, closing those deals as well. So that's kind of the supporting tasks that take place in order to allow you to maintain that critical business function. So we'll look at who is that business function owner. So it is always important to have this documented as well, so that when you're implementing this plan, you don't have to go looking for information in other areas. It is here in one document. So we have right now our business function owner in here. It is our CEO or COO, excuse me. Finally, next we have our vendors and external points of contacts. So who are the external points of contacts or vendors for this critical business function? So with sales, it could be your CRM service. It could possibly be your email service, your G Suite or your Microsoft 365 accounts to maintain email and contact with your sales leads and prospects. It could as well be the software that you use to do demos of your own software, or kind of closing those deals, sending out quotes, and any software you use there. So possibly QuickBooks or Xero, that sort of thing. The next area will be the max allotted downtime. So this is a stipulation for how long the business can survive without this function. So it should be listed here in pretty much, time in weeks, days, or hours. If you cannot sell your software, you cannot support your software, how long could you function without that? And so you'd have that listed here. Finally, any relevant policies or procedures. So this is a listing of any policies that would kind of govern this critical business function. So here we have a couple examples that we've included. Our data protection policy and our privacy policy both look at our sales process and kind of the areas around those in terms of protecting our data and maintaining privacy during an incident. The procedures, of course, this will be a link to, say, our sales process manual in Google Drive, or any documents that kind of outline how this critical business function is implemented within your company. So that step-by-step process. If anybody else needs to take charge for this critical business function, do they have the documents that they can quickly access to find out how to do it if they don't already know? The next section is the contracts or service license agreements. So is there any service license agreements or contracts that would be affected by this? So here you can include those relevant SLAs or contracts here. So potentially, a vendor list or a contracts folder could be included here. And then again, any additional helpful documents. So this is just miscellaneous documentation that'll help you maintain and continue the operation of this critical business function during a disaster or a major incident. The next one we have here, another example, is delivering our product to existing customers. So our supporting tasks here are going to be maintaining our cloud-based SaaS environment. It's going to be maintaining our SaaS application, and then maintaining our security application code and repository as well. So that is our AWS instance. It is pretty much how can we continue to deliver our product and what services or supporting tasks are around delivering our product to customers. So who is that primary business function? So here we have our CTO. What vendors or external points of contacts need to be included here? So here, a couple examples would be such like your AWS account manager, possibly your Stripe or your payment processor, any other essential dev services, Jira, issue tracking, that sort of thing. What is your max allotted downtime? So how long could your customers function without having access to the security application? Is it a matter of 24 to 48 hours before that, you can no longer have that? It is a major interruption to your clients, and this is no longer maintaining that critical business function beyond that period. Finally, our relevant policies, so our software development policy, our software change management, our procedures here. So this would be the procedures that if somebody is not able to take care of this, so if Jay was sick or out with the COVID-19 virus, is there another person on the development team that could come in, a senior developer that could come in and take responsibility for implementing that critical business function or maintaining it? And then finally, any contracts again or helpful documents. So after we have our critical business functions, we could add in another one here if we had another example. These examples, as I said, will be specific to your organization or your company. So it is what you do and what you need to keep doing to maintain your business throughout this disaster or this incident. All right, so we'll go to the next section here, and this is the plan activation procedures. So these are going to be the steps that you will take to activate your business continuity plan. And we have this broken down into kind of two sections. What would happen during business hours? So what happens if everybody's in the office and a disaster happens, a fire breaks out, the office starts to flood, or you become a victim of a DDoS attack? So these are going to be that step-by-step process again, and then we have what happens outside of business hours. So here, just to kind of break down what we have implemented here for what our plan is when it gets activated during business hours. So during business hours, the business owner, the CEO or senior management will advise all employees that the BCR plan has been activated, and they will advise on any next steps. Employees are going to be notified that they will be required to move to an alternate site. Employees will cease business activities and begin preparations to move to that site or home remote work. In case that there's no immediate threat to the safety of employees, they'll wrap up what they're doing on their own time. They might finish the tasks at hand and then move on to the process of moving their office or going to the remote location or new area. In the case that there's no immediate threat, employees are going to gather everything. They're going to take their time, anything that they need to work. So these could be the items, their monitors to make sure that they have their mouse and keyboard. When Security closed operations, we went as far as some people taking their desks and chair so that they could effectively set up a complete home office at home, have everything that they need to work comfortably during this entire incident, the pandemic or the disaster. The employees are going to move to that business site. The CEO will check in to make sure that all employees have everything that they need to work safely from that remote site. We're going to look at our critical business functions and make sure that a plan is established so that the continuity of those functions can just keep moving. Nothing will interrupt them. And if something does, we are prepared and we have it documented. The next step is going to be the recovery procedures. So how will recovery procedures begin? And then finally, the deactivation procedures. So that will be that section 8 of the plan. How will you go about de-escalating or kind of rolling back your plan? Making everybody return to the office, setting up those workstations again, and everybody returning to that regular business operation. The next one here is going to be what happens outside of business hours. So of course, it might be very similar, but the means of communication might be different. If people are not in the office, you won't have that ability to possibly use your, walk into the office and say, all right, everybody, we're implementing the plan. You might have to do it via external communication, Slack, phone, email, that sort of thing. So it'll be necessary to kind of make that stipulation here. What will be that main external communication that you will use, and then indicate all those points again. So we'll jump here to the next section once we have finished up with our plan activation procedures, and we'll now take a look at the alternate business site. So of course, this may not apply for every single disaster. A DDoS attack, you might not have to leave your office for that. But a fire, you most likely will. It is always best to plan, of course, for most different incidents. So to have an alternate business site kind of already designated, or to have a remote kind of plan already in place for your employees to kind of move back to their work from home schedules. It is better to have that documented ahead of time so that you have it when you need it, and that you're not scrambling in the case of something unnecessary, unforeseen, and you're developing this alternate business site when you need to be moving to that alternate business site. So here we have an overview. So the alternate business site is going to consist of relocation to remote work, in the event of a disaster or a disruption that inhibits the continuation of business processes at the original business site. And the strategy should include both kind of long-term and short-term relocation sites. So if this incident is going to go on for a longer period of time, you should kind of take into account both a short-term plan and a long-term plan as well. So finally, the alternate site detail. So here you can list out any special considerations. We actually switched mainly to remote work, and even before that, we were mainly functioning with cloud services. So there wasn't too much of a change when we actually switched to the alternate site. It was mainly getting all the furniture and all the supplies we needed in our home office to have a more complete setup. So we almost completely rely on cloud services for business processes to begin. So employees are just going to transition to home offices for daily business. As well, a redundancy or failover plan for cloud services by region will be established if necessary. Home offices will act as the alternate business sites for both long-term and short-term disruptions. And then we have some kind of additional details here. We're going to maintain security and business continuity by implementing employee work from home procedures. So we're going to make sure that everybody knows what our procedures are. They're going to read our policies. The next is going to be ensuring that all employees are going to follow the remote work policy. And then finally, the alternate site processes will be achieved by creating snapshots for environments and syncing to an alternate region in the cloud service provider's settings. And then again, any alternate sites special considerations. So these would be specific to your organization again, but here you can detail any special considerations for people working from home or working from any new areas. Again, so that might take something like the physical and information security of their home office. So you might have to look at how your employees can better secure their remote area, access to that critical equipment we've already kind of covered, access to the critical dependencies. So do they have access to their email? Can they log into their CRM? Do they have access to their LastPass or their password manager? So those sort of dependencies as well, maintaining that they have necessary access to their the relevant software and services for their role. And then finally, again, employee health, their mental health, their social well-being, and comfort while they're working in this new location to maintain that as well. After we finish with our alternate business site, we can move on to the employee communication procedures. So this will be a documenting the means of communication. So if senior management needs to enact the plan outside of business hours, how are they going to reach out to everybody? So here we can actually document that means of communication. In the event that a BCA plan must be implemented, the following means of communication will be used to communicate and advise in priority order. So it's always best to have a few different options here. We've included 3 by default, and you can always come in here and change them. So if you don't use internal email or if they have different phone numbers, you can include that here as well. So in this instance, we have the internal phone, our internal chat messaging, and our mobile phone. And then here we have our different employees and their contact details. So we're listing out each individual employee. I've just included a few examples here as it is kind of specific to your organization. So we always suggest having kind of 3 means of communication. Having more than one is always preferred. And then we'll list out each individual employee, their primary contact, alternate contact, and their secondary alternate contact. And then we can continue to add in other contacts here as well. Once you've added in all your contacts, you can move forward to the next step, and that'll be kind of looking at the delegation of authority and responsibility. So again, what would happen to the major roles of your organization or to those key people if they were, if the incident affected them? So if they became sick from COVID-19, if there was a fire and they were unable to work for their home office or something like that. So this section is going to cover the delegation for the authority and who inherits the responsibilities if something was to take place. So here we have a bit of an overview. You can again edit those, and then we have those individual roles. So our CEO, we have that role listed here, and then just kind of breaks down in the event that the current CEO is incapable of carrying out their duties, the delegation of authority of the following individuals would provisionally act on the behalf of the CEO as the delegate for the duration that the CEO is absent or until there is a permanent replacement. So here we have our primary delegate and then our 2 alternates. We can include another alternate if one was already assigned. We have another role here, so we have our CTO, and you could add another role in as well. So if we did our COO, we can add them in. We can then put in who would be the primary delegate if our CEO is out of action. So let's just put in a couple examples from our company here. And then we could add another role in here. So this would, again, be very suited to your organization, very specific. So it's always good to include the roles that are relevant to your organization, but we've included a few examples: our CEO, CTO, and our COO. Those are kind of, the main ones that C-suite level. But again, it could be anybody. It could be senior developers as well, or people who have kind of key knowledge or key areas of expertise. If they aren't there, who can jump in to kind of fill that gap? So the last section is going to be that plan deactivation procedures. So this again is kind of what will happen once the disaster is over. The overview again is going to be a high-level description of the purpose and scope of this section, when and how the plan should be implemented to return back to normal kind of business operations. Is there anything that you have to do to return back to normal business operations, pretty much? So down below, we have the criteria for the plan deactivation. So this is going to be kind of what are the conditions that need to be met to return to regular business operations. So the primary business site has been confirmed to be sufficient in terms of safety, environmental, and physical security. You can return back. The critical business functions have been completely restored at the primary business site. Equipment, supplies, and procurement capacity is able to return and support the deactivation plan. So here we have our primary business function again. So this will be what business function is affected by this deactivation procedure. Are there any dependencies that go along with this critical business function? So is there anything that needs to be considered? If you're moving workspaces back, of course, you're going to have to look at, what is the equipment that has to be moved? Do we have to go back and look at our network security once everybody has returned into the office? Is there anything that we have to think about now that we are returning to regular business operations that kind of was out of sight, out of mind while we were at our alternate site or working remotely from home? What is the time to complete this deactivation step? So what is the time? How long will it take to get you back to your primary business site? And then the completion status. So if this plan isn't something that's already being worked on, you're kind of pending, it's in progress, or it's completed, or if you're in the midst of your deactivation or you're activating your plan, of course, these steps are kind of in that limbo state, so they haven't been or they don't have a state. Looking at an example, we have another one that we've added here. So it's ensuring the employees can return or move back into the office without disruption. So the office must be reviewed, cleaned, and staff are given the okay to return and set up their workstation. Again, it could be looking at the network security or ensuring that, antivirus again is scanning if you have any network crawlers, that sort of thing, to make sure that your office is again safe and that you're taking those again security precautions to maintain your business operations and secure your data. Finally, what is the time to complete this step? And then again, its completion status. So you could add in another one here, or you can remove them as well. And then once you're all set and you have built out your entire plan, we can continue here to the last step, and that is the summary. So this will look at the different areas that we've created here. So it'll also give us a bit of an example of what that document is going to look like. So again, this is kind of the example I had in the handout today. So it should kind of be familiar. We had that copy that we shared in the GoToWebinar meeting software. Again, so we can kind of look here. We have our overview, the scope of our plan, the objectives, and the conditions of the plan. So that is our introductory section. What is the plan? Why are we doing it? We have our risk assessment. It is looking at the different threats, the different risks that would cause us to implement this plan. It's looking again at their probability, criticality, impact on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We have a listing of our critical business functions here, the supporting tasks, the owner, the vendors, max allotted downtime, relevant policies, and any sort of procedures or helpful documents. Our other example here for our critical business function. We have our plan activation procedure. So how's that plan going to be activated during business hours or outside of business hours? Our alternate site details, our means of communication, so we can quickly and easily see all our employees and how to get in contact with them, our delegation of authority and responsibility, and then finally our deactivation procedures here as well. When we're ready to export, we can click here to export it. It's going to do a bit of processing here, and we'll get a notification popping up when our document's ready to download, but we're good to go here. And then we can click to download it, and we have that PDF again that I showed earlier. If you ever need to make any changes to your plan, you can always come in here, and business continuity plans are always evolving and should be kept up to date. So you can always jump back in here, edit those relevant sections, or jump to the summary and export it again. So I know we kind of covered a lot today, so I want to thank everybody for kind of joining us, and I'm just going to kind of jump back here to our slide deck. And again, thank you, and I guess we can kind of take a look at to see if anybody has any questions.
All right, thank you, Russell, for all of that. That's a lot of really, really great information to process. So on this, if anyone has questions, you can go ahead and start dropping those into the Q&A box here, and I'm going to start going through those. I have one that I'm going to drop into the chat here that came through. And so Russell, this question here is, can you give some examples of critical business functions? What would those be for an e-commerce company? So let's just talk about that for a bit and kind of brainstorm on what are some of those functions that they might have.
Yeah, so with an e-commerce company, of course, one thing for them is going to be maintaining their e-commerce operations. So again, it's going to be maintaining their sales process. So that will be one thing. Again, for payment processing with an e-commerce website, ensuring that you can kind of maintain your Stripe account or that integration would be a critical business function. Your website as well, your marketing operations, these could all be critical business functions or some examples for an e-commerce website. Again, they're going to be kind of different or varying depending on your role. If you were a manufacturer or you designed hardware components, maintaining your supply chain so you can have access to the relevant supplies to create what you need to create. That could be one for the kind of the manufacturing section, excuse me, as an example.
Yeah, definitely the storefront, that public-facing website. I would also, as a marketer, I think about things like the ability to communicate with your customers, and you want to make sure that you're able to really know that you can effectively communicate to them, especially if something is going on. You want to be able to let them know if there's some kind of outage or something kind of like that.
Exactly, and that's a great example, especially coming from my background in customer success, always having that open lines of communication, so ensuring that you're able to continue to support. And of course, in an incident, communication is always key. So being able to still talk to your clients and let them know that while something may be kind of interrupted right now, you have a plan in place, and that you're going to work on kind of maintaining that. So you kind of look at that max allotted downtime in your critical business function and then take that into account so that you can communicate that to your clients. So it gives you a little more kind of wiggle room for that critical business function.
Yeah, and something else that we recommend is when you're going through and creating this plan is starting off by doing a brainstorming session with your team. So that way you can take the critical people in the team and you can really go through and brainstorm what are these risks that we're thinking about, some of the things that are maybe improbable, some of the things that are highly probable, what are the critical business functions that we can and can't operate without, and who would be those next delegates. You really start this off with a brainstorming even before you start putting them into, your word processor document that you're using or your Security app.
That's a great point. Yeah, having those heads in the room that know the different critical business functions is vital as well. So making sure that you as you said, brainstorm, bring in your sales team, the head of your sales team, marketing, success, customer service or support, your development team. All these areas might have, different critical business functions that the other ones might not think of. So having those heads in the room to kind of list those out and have them documented, so then your security team can kind of move forward and kind of examine them again a little more in-depthly, and then kind of bring in those subject matter experts where applicable if they do have questions for kind of developing the plan a little more.
Great. So here I've got another one I'm dropping into the chat. So since coronavirus is an evolving disaster and so much is changing, how do you know when to do the deactivation process?
So that's a great one. And with Corona, again, it's kind of we're impacted by outside forces. So with the coronavirus, we're going to have to take into account what our government says. So what our what our federal or kind of nation government says and what our provincial or state government say. So they will probably be the authority on when we can return to work and return to regular business operations. So with Corona, again, it's something that's emerging. So like we said, we want to plan for both the long term and the short term. So having that kind of in place and understanding that this is an evolving situation, it may take time. This deactivation process may not be something that we can kind of begin to implement until an external factor says it's okay. So with coronavirus, we might have to wait until the provincial or state government allow us to return to regular business operations and return to our office environment. Yeah, so it might be something that you might have to wait on. Again, once the government gives it the all clear, your company itself will probably take a minute to look at the different factors. Is it still safe for us to return? What would be the impact if when we return to the business operations, somebody got sick then? So how would that impact our organization? So your company itself may take a little bit more time in kind of de-escalating or kind of deactivating the process again. So it's an ongoing thing. It might take some time to implement. You might wait on external factors as well as internal ones to kind of make that decision. But it should be something that, again, would be kind of decided at that highest level and then efficiently communicated to your employees.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially about it being an evolving thing. And sometimes when we think about disaster recovery and business continuity, we think about it being one event like a fire or an attack that is then over and done with. But this is definitely something that's a much longer outline. A lot of people are coming up with additions to business continuity plans for short, mid, and long term, as well as plans A, B, and C, because there is so much uncertainty while we're looking at, well, what is going to happen next, and how do we know, when can we return to normal operations? So it's definitely not kind of I think the time frame is very much dependent on the disaster that you're facing right now.
Exactly.
All right, and so just a reminder, the Q&A box is open. So if you have any questions that you want answered for your company, for yourself, things that you're looking at and trying to understand about your own continuity plan, feel free to jot those in there now. I have one here that is definitely another COVID question. So this one is, so our business continuity plan didn't include something like a global pandemic. What should you do about responding to a new risk that you didn't include on your risk assessment?
So that's a great question. So like I said, these kind of documents are almost live documents is the way I would like to think on them. They're never set in stone. Risks come up all the time, and especially in a SaaS application, as an example, every time you do a deploy with your code, you can be kind of putting out new risks. So if you didn't include a global pandemic, what you can do, I always recommend just going back and looking at that new risk. So scheduling a meeting with your security team, jumping back, adding in that new risk, assessing it, looking at it in terms of your critical business functions, and then incorporating it into your business continuity plan. So again, going through that same process we did today, but looking at it with that lens of a global pandemic in your mind. And again, it's probably pretty easy now to kind of see that, or to look at how that would affect somebody today, as we are all kind of functioning in a global pandemic right now. So again, just kind of jump back, you can add that new risk in, and then approach your business continuity plan with the idea of updating it to look at that new risk of a global pandemic.
Absolutely. That's a great point, that it's really a living document. You don't create this plan once and then just leave it on the shelf. You want to update it as there's new risks. Maybe your business pivots or evolves or adds some sort of line of business that then becomes an additional critical business. So it's our business function.
Exactly, and that's like a lot of information security. It's always ever evolving and changing. So if it's not a global pandemic forcing you to add a new risk. It might be something where you'd want to take, a quarterly meeting or at least a meeting once a year to go back and look at, the risks that have emerged or come up or that might affect your business in a new year. So it's always good to kind of, these documents, like you said, are live documents, ever evolving, to go back and kind of do that on an ongoing process. If something doesn't force your hand, it's always good to be prepared ahead of time.
Yeah, that's a great point about scheduling time to make sure that you're updating these plans as well. Because one of the other things that changes is people's teams can frequently change. And so if you have delegates that are in your business continuity plan and those delegates are changing around and you have to swap those names, you want to know that that plan is up to date and that anyone who's having to reference that plan knows who to go to for the right person. They're not seeing somebody's name in there who's like, well, that person left a couple of months ago, so who do I contact now?
That is exactly right. Another great point. Companies are always changing nowadays, and so to have an updated employee contact list, again, even having the relevant phone numbers. So while roles might not change, people get new phones a lot of the time. People might update an email address. So having those updated as well, or having a process in place so when they do change, employee knows to contact their superior to let them know, can you update the business continuity plan? My details have changed.
Absolutely. All right. And one more question, which is perfect. We have just enough time. If you have a question, just a reminder, drop that in right now. We should have time for one more question after this, if you have something that you really want to ask. I like this one. It's a little bit getting into kind of like the theory about business continuity and disaster recovery plans. So the question here is, what's the difference between business continuity and disaster recovery plans? Are they two different plans or like one big plan?
So they can kind of be rolled in together. Again, our plan that we have is both looking at the business continuity and the disaster recovery. So it's rolling the two plans together. One is like we kind of walk through. They look at your critical business functions. How can you continue and allow your business to maintain the critical business functions, allow it to keep operating, and then what happens if there is a disaster and how can you recover from it? So what would be those remediation steps? Again, that's kind of the deactivation plans. They can kind of be broken apart. It kind of depends on your organization, but having the two of them together allows you to kind of look at them from both sides, look at both the risks and how you can continue to, allow your business to function at the same time that these risks may affect you.
Yeah, the example that our CEO puts out there that I think is just really a good visual example between the difference on these and why they really work well hand in hand together is disaster recovery is kind of like putting out the fire and saying, hey, evacuate the building, put out the fire, make sure that you have backups for the stuff. It's those immediate steps that you're taking when the disaster is hitting. And business continuity is saying, all right, everyone is safe, everyone is working from home in the case of this pandemic, or has the particular protective equipment that they need to be able to do business. Now, how do you continue business as much as possible as normal and continue to serve your customers and new customers who may be needing your services at the time? And so I think the fire is a great example of why these are really kind of like a hand in hand plan that you have one and the other working together.
No, that is a perfect example. The disaster recovery, it's that incident itself. So it's, the moments or the steps you're going to take to, as you said, put out that fire, contain that flood, stop that DDoS attack. And then once you stop that plan, has it affected your business operations and making sure that they can continue if that disaster is ongoing.
Yeah, and it's, a lot of people have kind of informal business continuity plans. They have insurance for their buildings, they have backup accounts for servers, things like that. And so we do a lot of these things intuitively for a business without really having the full plan documented and put together. But these plans are just a great resource to make sure that you're really prepared for just about anything that comes next, which right now, since a lot of us don't know, none of us know what's coming next, it's a great way to make sure that you're prepared as things are changing.
Exactly. And alongside of having the plan as well is testing it. So if you haven't been forced or you haven't run into an incident or a disaster, it is also good to kind of sit down and test your plan. So to test it ahead of time, it would have been great to have gone through a simulation potentially 6 months before an incident, so that if there's anything in your business continuity plan that you have missed or you didn't account for. Doing a tabletop exercise is a great way to kind of look at it again or kind of do some ongoing brainstorming. So again, if new risks are identified or you have a new plan, or you want to update your existing plan, to kind of go back and then take a minute to kind of reevaluate things and test your plan ahead of time. So it'll kind of give you a little forethought into it, and as well make you even more prepared, so that when something does happen and you have to implement it, you've already run through a test.
Yeah, absolutely. And that idea of tabletop exercises and really getting the key people in the room to run some scenarios and say, hey, what are we going to do if half of our workforce is under quarantine or unable to work at all for some reason? What if, our sales goes below 50%? How long would we be able to sustain our business? What if we can't access, a key business site or facility that we need to be able to function? And so really looking through what are these different hurdles, things that could happen, and working through how would your team respond if a particular thing happens. So that way, that you have some ideas and people feel more prepared depending on what happens in the next couple of months. All right, Russell, any final thoughts or questions or things that you want to emphasize for people before we sign off?
No, I think that's about it. Again, it is a free tool within the Security application, so if you haven't checked it out, jump in there and check it out. Other than that, thank you very much for your time today, and I believe we're actually doing the webinar again next Tuesday. So if you wanted to rejoin or kind of see it again, you could join next Tuesday.
Yeah, feel free to share as well if you have someone from your company or team or friends in your network that you feel like they would find this information useful. We wanted to make sure that this information can be free and available for people, since so many people are having business continuity plans that are in a state of activation right now, and really trying to figure out how do you make sure that these plans are as useful and best utilized as possible. All right, thank you everyone for joining. I appreciate all of you being here and wish you all of the best.